Hello, and welcome to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. Welcome to our guests, Magenta Pixie and Daniel, who are both back by popular demand. So, Magenta Pixie lives in the New Forest, UK, and she is the author of 5 best-selling spiritual books. Magenta is a channel for the higher dimensional divine intelligence known as the white-winged collective consciousness of 9. The transmissions she receives from the 9 have reached thousands of people worldwide via the extensive video collection on her YouTube channel. Magenta has worked with people from all over the world as an intuitive consultant and consciousness coach. Daniel, also known as Cat's Magic, is Magenta Pixie's husband, video editor, and book proofreader. He has also worked as an actor. In more recent times, he has made video appearances mainly on Magenta's Telegram channel, often providing a light-hearted and whimsical take on contemporary spirituality. He does, however, have a deep and profound respect for all spiritual traditions and is particularly interested in mystical Christianity and Gnosticism. And over to Chris.
Thank you, Becky. Welcome back, Magenta and Daniel, and welcome to all of our listeners. Thank you for joining our podcast today. So some of the topics we'd like to talk about are Magenta's work with the white-winged collective consciousness of 9. That's a mouthful, but it sounds very cool. And also the in-depth biblical research that Daniel has completed. And he did this research with no filters and no dogma, which makes it very interesting. So today, Magenta, let's start with you. In our last podcast, you briefly mentioned that you do channeling work, and we were hoping you could tell us a little bit about how you got started with this, and also for our listeners who aren't familiar with your work, a little bit about the kind of insights that you channel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for asking us back. Really nice to be here. Such a lovely energy. Well, I have spoken about how I got started quite a lot, so I'll see if I can look at something a bit different within that, because I feel that when it comes to channeling or psychic awareness or clairvoyance, you know, you can sort of pinpoint a spiritual awakening when it first happened. But then when you look back even further, right back into childhood, you will find that these things have kind of been there the whole time, but you might not have been as aware of it. I've had people say to me, oh, I woke up 2 years ago. You know, I had my spiritual awakening in 2020 when things started happening. But when you actually speak to those people, they've actually been awake in many ways since childhood. So I think the very first thing that I remember that would link me to some kind of awareness or memory, which is what the 9 are, higher dimensional memory streams for me, and that's what they are for everyone. They're our quantum memory, our true memory. I think the first time this happened, I was about 7, and I was quite a strange child, actually. I used to, this is another thing, I'm told by the 9 that we are in training for what we are here to do spiritually, especially in this lifetime. And you're going to be talking later about, are we in end times? And, you know, the 9 would say in answer to that, yes. So we are trained without realizing from birth, possibly even prior to birth, for the role we're here to do. So what I did very much as a child was, as soon as I'd learned to read stories, I then started to tell myself stories. By the time I got to 7, I would actually sit down in an area in my bedroom. And back then, you know, I think this is early 70s. You might both remember, I don't know, but in the UK, we used to have like tennis balls and bounce them up against the wall. I don't know if that was a craze in the US, but it was a massive craze with the girls in the UK back then. I mean, you go to school, all the girls would have 2 tennis balls with them, and they'd be bouncing them up the wall in lines all along the playground. So So at the age of 7, I was doing that, and I would be, you know, playing with my tennis balls up against the wall all day at school during playtime, and then when I got home, and I started to tell myself stories. So I would make up characters, and I would feel like they were really there, and I'd be talking to them, and you know, I'd go back in the next day, and then something had happened to the character while I hadn't been in the story. So I think, you know, that hyperspace world, that imaginary world of real intelligent beings, was there as a child right from the age of 7. The next time I feel I moved into that, I guess, was my father was a hypnotherapist. He was actually an opera singer, professional opera singer, but he was also a hypnotherapist. And he took me into hypnosis at a very young age to help with things like confidence and if I had a headache. But when I was 11, I was really struggling at school with swimming. And I was in the bottom group, still wearing my armbands, which you call water wings in America. So, you know, I'm 11 and my classmates are diving into the pool and swimming these lengths, and I'm splashing around in the shallow end because I couldn't swim. So he took me into hypnosis to get me into a hypnotic state and to put that suggestion in that I would begin to learn to swim and have confidence with swimming. And what actually happened in that session, several sessions over a long period of time, regularly, with the aim to teach me to swim, to help me to swim, what would actually happen was I would feel like my head and face were parting into two, almost like part of me would move into a sleep phase and be in some kind of dream state without really any conscious awareness. And this other part of me would step forward. And this part of me was so different to me, but I knew it was me. And it was wise and knowing and strong. And this part of me would speak to my father while I was in hypnosis and talk about me in the third person. The reason why she is struggling with swimming is because of this, and this, that I, as me, didn't know about. This was the first time this had happened with my father. So I know this goes on all the time in QHHT and all of the offshoots of QHHT and similar. But back then, my father had not known this, and he was fully trained by a extremely adept hypnotherapist at the time, but he had not worked with anyone who spoke back to him in that hypnotic state. So that was his first awareness of the ability for the hypnotic subject to be able to speak back. It just happened naturally. For me, what the 9 have said to me since is the brain was moving into a certain configuration, which they call beyond the theta brainwave state. I don't know what it's called mathematically, but they call it beyond the theta. So because I had moved into that state at the age of 11, when I actually entered into a conscious intention for channeling, my brain already knew what to do, because the brain held the memory or the nervous system or whatever aspect of the body it is that moves into that, held the memory. So that was all going on at 11. And yes, I did learn to swim in the end, but all these other things about me were coming out, and it was an insight. And my father then taught me self-hypnosis. So really from young teens, I had self-hypnosis in place, which I turned away from. I turned away from the spiritual, the hypnosis as a young teen. I was far more interested in my friends, what was on TV, when we're going out, boys, all that kind of thing. But as I got older, I moved back into that spiritual awareness, and I had that ability to enter into self-hypnosis, which is so very similar to meditation, but it is different. It is different. So when it came to channeling, At that time, I was living in a flat, which I know in America you call an apartment, with my brother. And we were talking about spiritual concepts. And my brother, unbeknownst to me, had been studying all sorts of spiritual modalities and different religions. And so he was giving me the benefit of his knowledge. And on this one particular day, I remember the free newspaper coming through the door and feeling this heat down my arm, directing me towards this free newspaper. And I said, we need to look in there. Now, this is really common. Everybody will get this when they wake up. This is the meaningful, subjective experience. This is the outer aspect of true self, leading you to where you need to go, leading you to your mission. So I took the paper, I opened it up, and there was a great big advert in the middle for the local spiritualist church meeting. And I said to my brother, we have to go. So we went along, we went to the spiritualist meeting. I was absolutely fascinated. First time I'd ever seen a medium work. And there's this medium talking to all these different spirits, and I'm just fascinated. And I remember at the end of that meeting saying to my brother, I'm going to do something like that one day, but I'm not going to be like that person. I'm not going to be a medium. I'm going to be a medium for other mediums. But I didn't have a clue what that meant at the time. Didn't know the terms light worker or anything. So that was when things really sort of started to happen. And I consciously wanted to make that connection with the spiritual realm around me. I could feel that presence more and more and more. And I was asking, and that's so important. When you ask for this with a pure heart, meaning people say to me, what do you mean by pure heart? Pure heart means that you genuinely want this with no agenda other than it's what you're calling, it's what you're drawn to. It's done through the interest, the knowledge, the love, the connection. There's no agenda. When you ask with a pure heart, you will be given what you're asking for, because when you have a pure heart, it's in alignment with all that is good and all that is right. So I asked for this, and then I remember going to a bookshop and walking down to the esoteric section, and as has happened to so many people, this book sort of, was half edging out of the bookshelf. And when I went to look at it, it sort of fell out of the shelf onto the floor. And it was simply called Channeling. So many people have asked me about this book. I wish I could remember who wrote it. I have looked at books that were printed around that time with that name. I'm just not sure. But basically, it was a book about meditation, but guided meditation, where you would specifically go in and call to meet a spirit guide. So this is what I set out to do. I was utterly dedicated. I would set my alarm for 3 a.m. in the morning, because I had read somewhere, or my brother had read somewhere, that 3 a.m. was the most powerful time. There is truth to that due to numerology and the number 3 and everything. So I'd set my alarm for 3 a.m., wake myself up and go into meditation, not knowing anything about the pineal gland activity at that time, had no idea of any of those things. But of course, that's what I was working with. And I would go into meditation with the express intention to meet a spirit guide. Now, I'd read in the book that it said you may meet many false guides along the way before you meet the true guide. And every guide you meet, you ask them, are you of Christ consciousness? They can't lie. That's what it said in the book. So there's me, true to form, completely suggestible, as I always have been as a child. And that's something I've had to learn to create boundaries with. I went through that exact scenario that the book suggested, meeting all these false guides. And I would go into meditation, and along would come this strange looking being, or a human type being, all sorts of different beings. And they'd sit themselves down, and I would say, are you of Christ consciousness? And I would get things like, oh, no, I'm not. And I'm like, oh. And they'd go. This would happen again and again. Or they would just say, well, no, do I have to be? All this weird stuff. And I'm saying to my brother, I'm just not meeting the guide. They're all telling me, when I ask them, are you of Christ consciousness? They're all saying no. And then I can't talk to them, and they won't speak to me. And they're really annoyed that I can't talk to them. What's going on? And then this one particular day, I'm not sure what was different then, really. but something must have been, because I remember going into meditation and everything was in the imagination, everything was in the mind. And on this particular day, down this pathway walked this guide. But this guide was completely surrounded by and was part of light. And the light, I could feel it. So this time my body came into the visualization. I could feel the light in my heart, and my heart opened to this love. And I'd never experienced anything like it, you know. And I mean, I think I'm in my late 20s around this time, I guess. But I'd never experienced anything like this. And I was crying. I was literally crying. There were tears running down my face. And I looked up and said, oh my goodness, you are of Christ consciousness, aren't you? And this guide said to me, yes, I am. And so I'm getting all emotional. It was so profound, though. And it really is. And this is the thing with spirituality. It's not necessarily this huge, great, magical thing that occurs outside. It's this massive epiphany that occurs within you. And when it happens, it wakes everything up. That's the true awakening. And you're brought to the unification with self at that moment. Now, at that time, while I was feeling unification, feeling unconditional love and unity, I didn't intellectually understand it. I believed at the time I was communicating with a spirit guide, which is a being outside of me. It was only when I started to talk to this being that I would then get answers that I didn't understand, like, well, who are you? Well, I'm you. Well, how can you be me? You don't look like me. That kind of question. So I made a really good connection then. Once I'd made that connection with this being called White Spirit, I was getting all my questions answered, but I didn't really know what questions to ask. I'm there sat with this wonderful being of light, and I'm like, well, what am I supposed to ask you? Now I've got this being with me and I can ask any question in the universe. What do I ask? But my brother, because he'd studied spirituality and all of these different disciplines, he would ask me the questions to ask White Spirit. So I'd be writing everything down. I'd try and remember the question. Okay, have you ever heard of the many worlds theory of quantum mechanics, and does it apply to this reality? I didn't have a clue what that meant, didn't know what quantum mechanics was. I would go back into meditation. I would then go in, find White Spirit, ask the question, get the answer, come out of meditation. It just took a long time. And then one particular day, I remember my brother asking me something, and I thought, right, I must remember this question. Okay. And I'm trying to get this in my head because he's talking about time travel and stuff and timelines and realities. And I didn't understand these things. My brain couldn't get my head around these concepts. And then all of a sudden, and I was preparing to go into meditation, all of a sudden, while I'm awake with my eyes open, White Spirit was there. And I said to my brother, he's here. He's like, what do you mean? I said, White Spirit. He's like, he's here. And I'm not even in meditation. He's like, you're kidding. I said, no, I mean it. I can see him. I can feel him. He said, well, ask him now. You know, this is the kind of stuff that's going on between us. And White Spirit is saying, remain calm. Because the more excited you get, because I'd be like, oh my God, I can see you. This is unbelievable. It's like, relax, calm down, calm your energy. But why? Because this excitement is not really conducive to the connection needed. So I had to be taught this. I did not know any of this. I didn't understand about being grounded. I didn't understand about any of these things. I was taught this. So I would do exactly as I was told, because I'd asked with such a pure heart and such genuine need and desire to have this connection. And I listened to everything that I was taught. And yes, he was there. And I began to listen to him, answer what he's saying. And as I was speaking, I'm kind of moving my hands around and gesturing to my brother. And I remember him saying, you're just like those mediums. You're doing the same thing that they do. I'm like, hold on, I'm channeling, I'm talking to him because you've got this stream of consciousness coming in, and I'm trying to deliver the message to my brother. And my brother's fascinated because he's read all this stuff and he knew I hadn't. This is the thing. It wasn't as if I needed to prove myself to my brother that I was genuinely doing this, because he knew I did not know this stuff. And I wish he'd come on a podcast or an interview with me. I've asked him so many times, but at the moment he just wants to stay incognito. And he was so pivotal in my awakening, as was my father. So that's the very beginning, how it all happened, and it moved on from there. And I spoke to White Spirit. So this would have been several years that I was with White Spirit, and then I think it was around the year 2000. As we moved into the sort of 2000 years, I was told by White Spirit that because my own expansion had moved into a higher octave or upgrade, if you will, then the guidance system needed to match that. And White Spirit was fifth dimensional. So all of these are metaphors to explain what's happening with my mind, my body, my brain, my energy system. And I didn't understand all of that at the time. So he told me he was fifth dimensional, and I would be moved into communication with a guidance system that was sixth dimensional. I was really upset. I didn't want White Spirit to go. I'd been with him for years. He'd been a constant companion with me, helping me do tarot readings for people, talking to me about everything, guiding me through my life every time I got into scrapes. And he'd been a beloved guide, and I didn't want to lose him. But he explained that this was still him, but in an upgraded form, in a completely different form, but also it was not him, it was something more. And so I went through this transition of leaving White Spirit, leaving my energy fields, and this angelic being coming in that was white with white wings, looked like an angel with a human face sometimes, and sometimes a bird-like face. And I communicated with this being for a few days. It did not have a name, and then eventually it split into 9, and there were 9 of them. That was because I was such a, if you will, sensitive person and so suggestible, having worked with hypnosis. So what I'm saying here is, when you go through these experiences, you're in hypnosis while you're awake. You're in the same brainwave state, and it's such a big thing to see one angel split into 9. It was huge. So that's how it all kind of started. And they did have a name. I asked them their name. It was completely unpronounceable. It was like a high-pitched screech, and that's all I could really analyze it as, but it is actually geometric code. So I said, well, you're white, you've got wings, there's 9 of you, and you're a collective consciousness, so how about I call you the white-winged collective consciousness of 9? They were fine with that, and I thought that was quite a cool name. But obviously, as you say, it's a massive mouthful, and I don't think anyone else has got guides with names as long as that. And then I started to communicate with them, and it was in 2008 that they told me it was time to go public. And I kept this very private. And when they said, you need to go public, I said, do you mean you want me to tell people that I speak to you? Which was something I had never thought I would do. And they said, yes. And I said, but who do you want me to tell? Because I thought, are they meaning I've got to go down, tell the doctor, tell the people at the school teachers? I mean, just go out into the street and say, hey, everyone, I'm talking. Who do I tell? And they said, everyone. And I'm like, I don't understand. And they pointed to the internet. And I'm like, oh, I'm so naive. So I get on the internet and start looking around and finding some spiritually aware people and start telling them what I'm doing. And it kind of went from there. And that was 2008. And that's when I released the first video, which was really great help from Cat's Magic, who was my boyfriend at the time, because I remember saying to him and my brother, they were both talking about YouTube and how YouTube was so cool and how they would like to get on YouTube and maybe do some little plays or some comedy sketches or something. And I remember saying to them both, I wouldn't be surprised if one of you two doesn't actually get quite well known on YouTube. I've got this feeling. But I thought, well, it's not me, because I think YouTube is a bit silly and I don't really want to be part of this. I'm too focused on my spiritual work and my communication with the 9 to bother about YouTube. And this is how it works. You don't go out there and think, I want to be a famous YouTuber. You go out there and follow the guidance, and it will lead you, and it will be what you don't think. And Daniel kept going on and on. Are you going to write a script yet for us? Are you going to write that play that you said you would write? Yes, all right, Daniel, I'm talking to the 9. And then I came across this spiritual video. It was from Risa at the time. And he was bringing forward this stream of consciousness, this higher guidance communication, and had all these swirly pictures. And I thought, wow, I could do that. I wonder if Daniel would be happy, rather than to, for me to write a play or a comedy script, which, yes, I could do. Would he be happy to put some visuals together while I bring the channeling forward? And that was a big thing for me, because I'd never really channeled in front of Daniel, even though we'd been together for years. I talked about my channeling, but I'd never actually channeled in front of him. I thought he might think it was a bit silly and bizarre, and I just wasn't sure how he would take it. So I approached him and I said, would you do this if I brought my guidance through? Would you put visuals and make a video? He goes, yeah, sure. I'm like, great. So that's kind of how it started. The first video was 2008. And you're asking about the insights. I mean, literally, everything. I mean, whatever I ask them over the years, spirituality, awakening, health, wisdom, any question. And, I would kind of run out of questions after a while. And funnily, around about that time when I was releasing videos, people would send questions to me. I'd be like, great, I've got some more questions. This is because I couldn't think of any more, So I would write the questions down, ask them to the 9. And then when people realized I was answering their questions, I had so many questions come in. I'd have a document on my computer with like question after question. And I felt like my job was, I've got to answer every single one, because this is my role. I'm a messenger, I'm a medium, I must answer these questions. Of course, I realized I couldn't. There were too many. And I had to then learn about time management in the physical dimension and all of those things that we all learn. So, yes, I mean, the insights now are, obviously, it's always been about ascension, the change in frequency on this planet, how that affects the planet itself, the galaxy, us as humans. How does it affect us individually and collectively, especially, obviously, with the whole sort of what's happened since 2020 and what we're in now. What is that all about? Why is that happening? So these are the insights. So as for a specific insight, you can ask a specific question and I can answer them. But that's how I kind of got started. And obviously along the way, I've brought forward books. That was something else that was not intended. I did not sit down and think, I'm going to write a book now. I just was bringing forward information for videos. And it was Daniel, actually, on our 13th anniversary. We've been together 13 years, on our actual 13th anniversary. And I think I mentioned this to you before, because we spoke about the number 13 and how significant it is. So Daniel's asking me all these questions about contracts. What is a contract then? What's a past life contract? What's a soul contract? Are you born with them? Do you have to stick to them? What if you don't want to stick to them anymore? How do you get rid of them? I'm like, hold on, I can't answer all these questions. Let me ask the 9. And the 9 came forward and brought forward all the answers to Daniel's questions. And they kept talking about becoming the masters of the matrix. And so the next time I had some time to sit down and do some writing, I said, I'm going to ask the 9 to bring all that information through again for you and write this down. And I'm going to call the video Masters of the Matrix, because they kept talking about Masters of the Matrix. So I asked them to come forward and they came forward. And this particular transmission was just going on and on and on. And I'm like, this is going on a bit. How is this going to wrap up? This is 10-minute to 15-minute video. This is like going into concepts I can't possibly wrap up in 15 minutes. And then I realized, oh my goodness, this is a book. So that's how the book started. And I've written 5 and 6 now. Daniel is now editing the 6th one. We're right at the final stages. That's about to be released any day, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I'm hoping. Really depends on how that goes. So the books move through specific teachings. The first one being matrix awareness, which is the awareness of your matrix system, your energy system. Matrix mastery, which is mastery over that energy system, or actually being the master within it rather than over it. And then the next book is matrix architecture, which is the construction of your matrix, the construction of your energy system, because as you construct it, you understand what it is. The third book being Matrix Transportation, which is the matrix being a vehicle, as in the Merkaba vehicle. How do you move it? What does that mean? What does it mean to have your energy system as a vehicle and start moving? That's a difficult metaphor for people. So that book explains that. The other two are sort of offshoots in different subject matter and don't necessarily follow on from those three. They were specific to questions being asked, and there were so many questions they turned into books. And then the one that I have written, that Daniel is now in the final editing stages with, is about matrix integration and matrix unification. That's the integration of your matrix and unification of your matrix, not just with you individually, but unification with all matrices. That's what that book is about. So it follows on from the first three. So yes, I've said lots, so I'll stop talking now so someone else can speak. Otherwise, I'll take up the entire video.
Magenta, that was fantastic. And I loved hearing your story. Now, there's so much that came to mind, but there were two big things. One was you talked about when you started on this path, you started to have things happen, like the book falling off the bookshelf, and incidentally that's happened to me as well. And what this is synchronicity. When you're truly on the right path, and especially when it's the right spiritual path, things just happen that the signs are so massive that they're almost impossible to ignore. So I think that was wonderful. I loved your examples there, and I just wanted that to be, a guidance for others who are on their own spiritual journey, to look for synchronicities, to look for signs. They can happen in all different ways. So I love that. And then another thing that you said, when you were sad about losing your lovely fifth dimensional guide, and he said that this new expression, these new beings would be him, but not him. I have a concept of what that would mean, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on what that means.
Yeah, that's a great question. So what that means is we have a self, if you will, like an echo. I can use the sun as an example. So if you look at our sun in the solar system, you're seeing a physical ball of heat, a physical star giving off all this heat. And we know it's there because it can be measured. But what I am told is this is the physical sun at the end of many, many emanations of central suns throughout dimensions. It's all the same sun, but each sun is more expansive in a higher, if you will. And again, the word higher is a metaphor, but it is a more expansive dimensional field that all these suns are in. Now, we are the same. We have an aspect of ourselves in all these dimensions, in all these different states, in all the harmonics within those dimensions. So white spirit was me fifth dimensionally. Now, not necessarily me as Magenta, but it did turn out in the communication with him that I personally did experience a past life where I was the form that he presented himself to me. So white spirit presented himself actually as a Zulu warrior. That doesn't mean he was a Zulu warrior. He's my fifth dimensional aspect, but he presented as a Zulu warrior because I was expecting to see a spirit guide, and I expected a spirit guide to look like either, like all the other mediums' spirit guides, which would either be a North American Indian or a nun or whoever. If a non-physical energy form had come to me, I wouldn't have understood it at that time. It would have potentially caused me fear because it was too much for me at that time. So he, or that aspect, came to me in a form I would recognize. When white spirit then moved into becoming that first aspect of the nine, or the nine, that is white spirit's aspect in the sixth dimension, moving into the seventh. But what they're also saying to me is they are individualized beings in and of themselves, separate to me. white spirit is a presentation in the fifth dimension, choosing a form that was one of my past lives, but he still holds his individualized consciousness because there's no time there. I can still speak to white spirit now if I want to. I had to understand the letting go of and the moving into the nine in order to move into the expansion. But now I've moved beyond the form. So when I speak to the nine, I don't always see nine white-winged beings. I can if I want to. I can call white spirit if I want to. But I've moved beyond the form with them simply because I asked them. If you can upgrade from the Zulu warrior to 9 white-winged beings that look like angels, can you upgrade to anything else? I mean, what's the next form? And they would show me, which are stars and planets and basically looks just like our galaxy. And then beyond that, which is frequency and energy and light. And beyond that, there is nothing to see. It's just pure knowing and pure understanding, and then you're moving into source as best as you can interpret that. So that's what that means. It's all me, and as you and everyone listening, that's all them, because everybody has this emanation. But because I didn't understand those concepts back then, that energy of all knowingness, all beingness, or source, if you will, as memory, comes to you in the form that you are able to best understand without causing you any fear or worry or confusion or ungroundedness or even insanity. Because I was told that that can also occur if not done in balance. If this process does not occur in balance, extreme distortion can set in. I mean, I've had people write to me and say, I am Jesus, or I am Thoth, or I am the universe, or I'm the only being in existence, or whatever it is that they are. Or I'm here to save the planet. I'm a starseed from another planet. I'm here to save everyone. So I will say, well, all of that is true, but their belief is that they are the only one and no one else can possibly be it. That's because they have moved into an awakening that is not in balance. And I've managed to help some of these people by saying to them, yes, you are that. And it's so important that you know you are all these things. But it's also equally as important for you to know that so is everyone. And some people have forgotten, they don't remember, and other people know. When people realize how powerful they are individually and within unity, they can get that balance. But some people I couldn't help because they wouldn't have it. It was wrong to them. And they believed that they were the only one. So they're on a journey to discover how to come out of that. And their guidance system would be helping them. Unfortunately, some people get lost in that. So that's why it's so important to understand that all of these different emanations in the dimensions are me. So when white spirit upgraded to the 9, it was the same being in an upgrade, in a more expansive state, closer to source, in accordance with my own understanding and expansion. But they're also individual constructs of consciousness in their own right.
Magenta, I love how you explain this. It's so clear, and you take us on a journey, and I'm with you 100% of the way. I feel like, because you're so clear, you haven't lost me, and I really do feel and think the same way. I have the same understanding of this, and we as human beings are physically expressed in this third dimensional planet at this time, but we have aspects of us that cross all dimensions. And as you say, I see that and feel and know it. And we do reach a point where we recognize that we are all of these things. We are all one, and at different levels we know that. And so this whole concept of separation, it's both I want to say not a curse, or it's one of the biggest challenges, but it's one of the biggest gifts, because it gives us the opportunity to explore life from a unique individual perspective and gain knowledge and experience in a linear fashion that's just manageable in little steps. But of course, because we feel the separation some things feel incredibly painful, and it's for me, I think it's both entirely natural but also completely bizarre that we are in this situation, that we are in this state, because it feels very surreal to me when I actually think about it. And that's a concept I've always had from when I was really tiny. I would just sit and look out the window and think, how come I'm me, and that's that, and I'm separate to that, and this is all going on. I find it really confusing because I would try and follow everything that I could see and feel around me all in one go and experience it as all in one go, but I couldn't do that, and I had to learn to be just me and be separate from everything else. But so I do understand what you're saying. I think that's wonderful. Thank you. So yes,
oh,
yeah.
sorry. I wanted to thank you for the way that you explained the separation and the unity too. That really, really resonates with me. When I'm working with my spirit guides and support team, or whatever you want to call all of them, either individually or through a medium, I'm always like, I want everything now. Like, I want to remember everything and get everything. And they're like, well, you can't have everything all at the same time, you know. And the way you explained that is basically very similar to what they said. But I think the way you said it was just really, really clear and resonated really well. So thank you for that, Magenta. And I also wanted to call out, I loved how, so for many people out there who are just starting to talk with their guides, sometimes it's a scary thing because there's a lot of talk about darkness at this time in our journey right now too. So I love your question, are you of Christ consciousness, right? That's so simple. It's so easy to do. It's something that, you know, we can all ask, right? When someone or something new comes in. And so I thought that was a great tip. So thank you for that. And I also love the, we're here in training right now for what we're here to do. I found that very profound, especially in this lifetime. I think it's something as more and more people awaken and understand that we all have a role to play, and that the role that each of us have is very different. They're all important. They all tie together in ways that we may not see clearly right now. So thank you for all of that, Magenta. And Daniel, so at the very beginning, we touched on many people think these are end of times. What are your thoughts on that? And have you done any research that collaborates or disproves that? Would love to hear from you.
Okay, am I unmuted? Great. Thank you so much for inviting myself and Magenta to come back on. So end times, and specifically the book of Revelation in the traditional Christian Bible. So when I first started looking at the Bible, I was intimidated by looking at the book of Revelation, because like many people, I'd only had snapshots from documentaries, from artwork, of these epic scenes with these creatures and, you know, monstrous creatures and cataclysmic events going on. So I was a bit intimidated by it, but by the time I actually reached it, I'd had the opportunity to go through a certain journey on how prophecies and visions can be presented throughout the Bible. If you just jump straight into the book of Revelation, of course, it's terrifying, it's horrendous. It's the same with Nostradamus. If you take a snapshot of something out of context, it's monumentally just like discouraging and overwhelming. So I have looked at the book of Revelation on and off, and I also talked about it at a Bible study group. And to be honest, when it came up, a few of the other students were kind of groaning because they just couldn't get their head around it. The reason is the book of Revelation is unique in character in the New Testament, because it's a gradual story about about Jesus and his ministry and what happened to him and what was accomplished for humankind, and then a series of letters which are embellishing the kind of Christian theology. And then out of the blue, this apocalyptic vision, and then the Bible closes, and it's almost like you can be thinking, what just happened? It was this lovely developing story. Well, not lovely as such, but it comes with a message of hope, and then boom, what is this about? And it's so abstract and strange. It can be a bit jarring to some people, but the thing to remember is that the Bible, in its essence, is a collection, like if you're making a greatest hits album of the 1980s, there's so much to choose from, and at some point groups of people and councils have got together and chosen what they think is best to include, what is most useful. And the book of Revelation has stood the test of time in the amount of interest it's received. Now, the book of Revelation, the scholars are kind of out on this because it is attributed by many people to have been written by Saint John the Apostle, who also wrote the Gospel of John. Other people think that you can't verify if it is the same John. He's simply recorded of John of Patmos, which is a small Greek island, and it's generally understood that John, whoever he was in exile. So he was on his own, he was solitary, and he would have had the opportunity to, I guess, either pleasantly or unpleasantly, just there in the wilderness on his own, to have gone into deep contemplation and prayer, and for whatever reason, certain visions were revealed to him. And I'm inclined to think it is actually Saint John who was exiled as a Christian for his outlandish views. You know, at the time, it would have been very rebellious to be a Christian and to be teaching these things. So I am of the inclination that it is Saint John. And it's so replete with visions and descriptions of political events and upheavals and metaphoric things and things, just a cacophony of things happening all at once. And whereas people over the years have tried to break it down, every scene, what does this amount of numbers mean? Things like, I believe there's parts about the amount of stars in the sky, and it's often fractal in nature. There'd be like a beast who has this many limbs, and on each limb there's a certain amount of number of eyes and things like this. And it is actually reminiscent of some of the prophetic books of the Old Testament. If you just jump into the book of Revelation, it is like scary, it's weird, it's like almost like a horror movie, like these beasts rising from the sea. But if you can actually calm down and look at each scene in a more measured way and think, all right, so we've got numbers here. We've got like in some kind of dark, feminine, monstrous goddess. And I was inclined for a while. You can, as many people as you can think of who are presented with the book of Revelation would come up with different interpretations, especially regarding throughout the ages. You can imagine, oh, that character must mean that, this must mean that country. So it stood the test of time for 2,000 years because people keep coming back to it thinking this must now be the end time. There's always been people who have been like, this must be the end of time. It matches the book of Revelation exactly, but it's so abstract. I think you can get into a place where you can drive yourself crazy looking for the conclusive, definitive interpretation of each thing which is presented to you. Now, I didn't know where to begin with this, but thankfully, all you ladies were talking about how once you jump into the flow of things, you're naturally kind of presented with the guidance and the books you need. So I found an amazing book by an author called David Pawson, who I'd previously been reading, and he's written a book dedicated to analysis of the book of Revelation. It's called When Jesus Returns. And I thought, I feel safe with this guy. I know his work. I know he's going to kind of bring it forward in a more measured way. And so by the time I got this book, I already felt like it was a friend taking me on a journey with him. So he offers, right from the outset, a way to make the book of Revelation more palatable. So you have to look at it through the lens of the culture of the time. So he suggests at the beginning that when the book of Revelation was written and recorded and shared, it must have been recognized it was valid. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been shared so widely. You have to look at it in the context of John was addressing the people of the time. So whereas it might seem abstract language to us now, because he was addressing the people of the time and the situations of the time, it would have been quite easily understood in that context. People would have known what he was referencing, or what each scene, what each beast, what signs in the sky would have meant. Us 2,000 years later, we're just like, this is weird. We need to unravel it. It's like a mystery game. But then because we're this far away from it, he also sees that it could mean certain things happening in the world, as in like a prophetic vision of when this thing happens and they all line up, it must mean something significant is happening. But this is the view I tend to resonate with mostly. Hang on, just get my little notes up here. So, and that is that, sorry, it doesn't scroll. There it is. That is, you can think when he wrote it, he was prophesying something was about to happen imminently. Obviously, over the years, other people have taken it as a framework for how the end of the world, or the end of the universe, or the return of Jesus, or the devil reigning supreme. They've taken it as a framework of how it's going to play out, like paint by numbers. When all these things come together, it's showtime. I'm kind of more relaxed and more optimistic, because I think it's like a projection of something, a series of energies and types of characters and personalities coming together that can signify something happening in any time period. And what I mean by that is, just as in 1984 by George Orwell. Now, he wrote that just after the war, I believe. He would have had no idea about the way technology specifically was going to develop, but he could recognize how humans tend to go into certain dark places and what they want to do, the governments, how they want to control people, the kind of things which are suppressed, the kind of the way people rebel, and ultimately how, if as a society, as a world, we don't listen to each other and we don't respect each other, these natural factions of people will crop up and we're all just unhappy. And the weird thing is, as we can see over the last 2 years, he seems to have known something, because it is kind of remarkably similar to how George Orwell predicted things might go, should we allow it to go that way. Or if you don't pay attention and keep things in check, it will naturally go into that state. The society will naturally start treating its citizens this way. I think it's probably the same, possibly the same with the book of Revelations. I think John was seeing a vision, and it was presented to him in certain ways through mythical beasts and heavenly scenarios of certain things which can come into play. And that's what he was projecting. When this starts to happen, it's inevitable. This thing will follow. Step 1, step 2, step 3. And that's why I think ultimately the book of Revelation is an optimistic book, and it is actually perfectly placed at the end, because it gives us a journey throughout the whole Bible through humankind's interaction with God and angels and other spiritual forces. And then by the time you reach the book of Revelation, you have reached a level of spiritual maturity to be able to look at this calmly and not get excitable about it. All three of you ladies were talking about how when you started to really take the time to look into things, you can be overwhelmed by the amount of things you're feeling, by the amount of like what path to follow, what book to look at. And I think it's the same with everyone. And if you don't keep it in check, you can burn yourself out, make yourself kind of neurotic, or some people, they throw it all away entirely because it's too abstract and weird. So that's why I would suggest to people, they don't just jump into the book of Revelation with this excited attitude, like, I'm going to solve this. This is epic. Oh my goodness, look at this. I mean, everybody knows the whole mark of the beast thing, and you can debate that forever. The interesting thing there is, I was pondering on this earlier, because I don't have a smartphone. I've always been reluctant to get a smartphone. But there's a line in there, I'm paraphrasing slightly, but he was talking about you won't be able to buy anything unless you have a mark on your hand or a mark on your head. And you've got to think 2,000 years ago, if some guy was having a vision, and some people think he was also perhaps taking hallucinations because of the way the language kind of is patterned, you wouldn't even been able to have the concept of a phone or a computer or a car or anything. So you can imagine this blurry vision he might have had of people constantly going everywhere doing this, paying for their money or showing a pass to somewhere, you know. So it stands to reason, or the only thing he could have recorded was there's something about the hand. It must be something on your hands everywhere. QR code, maybe, I don't know. What when he said it's on the forehead, though, that only that beggars belief. I mean, I know certain smart glasses are coming out, and you know, so you can get your whole phone augmented on the screen of your lens or something. So it is incredible. Bizarrely, though, there are some interpretations of the Bible, and this kind of flips it, that it's not actually 666, it's 611. So this whole time, people might have been getting hectic about 666, and it's been 611 this whole time. This just goes to show how the Bible is it's an evolving thing. People keep finding new fragments, new translations, releasing more nuanced parts from it. So it's very much a developing thing. People think the canon of the Bible is closed, and it is, in the sense that I don't think any kind of mainstream religious group will ever say we want to reintroduce certain books back into the Bible, but it is constantly developing. And so yeah, I don't feel like it's necessarily useful to focus definitively on what every scene of the book of Revelation means. I've kind of keep it sort of it's noteworthy, it's definitely noteworthy, but I think ultimately it is an optimistic message of how things need to play out and everything will work out better overall. And when you read it just in that one book, it can seem like the end of days is a terrible, 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 terrible thing. But we only live one day at a time. So I think by the time things roll around for us, hopefully we're ready to a degree to see it and deal with it in a calm, measured way. So that is my thoughts about the book of Revelation.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That's really very comprehensive. In one aspect, you know, we say it's written 2,000 years ago. That's eons and eons. In another, it's actually not that long ago in terms of humanity's history. And throughout humanity's history, there have been times when cycles come to an end, but then they start up with a new beginning. And that for me is, I do feel that we are in end times now, to the extent that it's coming to closure of one way of living on so many levels, and we are embarking on a new way. And that's something that so many of us do intrinsically feel. I loved how you said, I mean, it's funny because you said, and I feel that you're quite right, you know, don't focus on one thing. But part of me thinks that I once saw, sorry, I'm just not getting my thoughts all together, but I've got two different threads. I once saw the most beautiful exhibition where somebody who had done sort of like, she'd sewed like mosaics, and she'd done each chapter of the Revelations, each book. She'd done a big picture of it, and I remember one of them, I've been really surprised. I don't know if it was war and famine, but I think in there, I mean, she drew sort of black helicopters that were like black military helicopters. And I don't know if that was described as like a plague of locusts, but black locusts descending from the sky. I don't know if that's something that, do you know what I'm talking about, Daniel? Is that something that you can relate to? Because while I'm thinking that, and I'm sorry, is because my other thought was, when I was reading up about the book of Revelations, is that many times in our history in the last 2,000 years, scholars and people have thought that different books of the Revelations related to different centuries in our time. And so they were specifically focusing on the first few centuries after Christ and after the book was written by John. So now, fast forward 20 centuries, we're really feeling now that we perhaps are in the end times. But I'm wondering what makes us think that now as opposed to any other time in the past. And I'm sorry, I've asked two completely different questions there. Well, one's about the helicopters and the other one's about the end times.
I'd have to revisit it, the book of Revelation, to remind myself of what I thought about specific scenes and visions and things, you know, icons and strange happenings specifically. But I think after the most immediate period, the 1st and 2nd century, there was this great anticipation that it was imminent. It has to be imminent. And you're right, 2,000 years isn't really a long time at all. When you think about a year and then 10 years, 2,000 years is nothing really. It's just a variable. Time is just a variable. So the first 200 years, definitely after Jesus, humanity and the Christian movement and the early church were in constant kind of flurry about, you know, that they were patient, but they had this pronounced longing and anticipation for Jesus to return and take his followers, or the second coming, and everything would come together. So you can understand humanity, any group of people generally, after time goes by, more and more and more and more time, of course, people are going to lose interest with such immediacy of what's about to happen. And it's happened with loads of biblical books which haven't been included in the traditional canon. They've fallen out of public interest, but that's not to say that they're not still as vibrant and alive and crackling with incredible spiritual information as they always were. I think the nature of prophecy, though, is, I mean, even if you've seen the age of the internet, people can say anything and people will jump on it. But if it is not true, or it doesn't happen the way you thought it did, people will jump down your throat in a week and say, you're talking rubbish, you don't know what you're talking about, and they will turn on you. Try and think about that over hundreds of years. It's inevitable. After a while, a lot of people go like, yeah, the book of Revelation, it's kind of like fancy poetic writing, but it's got no particular validity. The weird thing is, I do have a great faith that when everything is revealed, it's not going to be revealed all at once. That would drive people crazy. People say they want a massive reveal, but would they really? Would they even believe it? If you put on your TV and they broke every news report and they told you the entire nature, the true nature of reality, people either wouldn't believe it, or they would be so cynical, or they would just switch their TV set off. So people who really want to know the truth, I don't like the hectic nature of wanting to know the truth, the demand for truth. It's been smattered throughout history in little bits here and there, bigger parts some places, and it all comes together. And each person's individual response to that information, it's just like food. You've got to digest it if it feels right in your body. And it's an accumulative thing. Most people don't get ill all at once. Most people don't get well all at once when they're trying to get better. It's the same with changing your attitude towards seeking information, seeking truth. You can burn yourself out if you, I know we especially recently, everybody's like, awake and aware, awake and aware. And when you meet a new person, are they awake and aware? And you're like, oh, they're awake, but are they aware? And it's like, I can't really, it doesn't sit right with me to categorize a person as awake and aware or asleep and unaware. I don't know. So we all need to chill out. There's nothing you can read really which will blow your mind. Everything on the internet now is just like new article, and everything has to blow your mind. And I think it's quite silly and childish. And this is what my misgiving about the internet has always been. The technology has developed quicker than our ability to use it responsibly. And especially when it comes to just like being awful to each other. It's this incredible tool for mass communication and discussion and debate. But that undercurrent of people's nature, I'm not counting myself above it, because when I first got on the internet and I go on these spiritual chat rooms, and you can think it's a spiritual chat room, it must be lovely. But little by little, people would just start challenging you and pulling your thing apart, and a hierarchy would evolve, and there'd always be some guy. It's always a guy who thinks he knows everything, and he tries to undermine everyone. And stupidly, for a while, this is like 20 years ago, I would try and outsmart them, and it would just become this intellectual ping pong of trying to demonstrate how you knew more about this. But most of the time, this is all I was doing. I'd be in a chat room and some guy would come along. This is before they called them trolls, just troublemakers, would try and present some spiritual concept and tell everybody in the chat room why they were wrong. But all I would do is minimize that window and quickly research it on Google until I found some article. And then I'd, oh yeah, that would do. And then I'd basically just paraphrase what I just learned on some random article to try and outsmart him. And to be honest, he's probably doing the same. So I've learned that that's not useful anymore. It can be useful to a degree to win a spiritual debate, but there's no legacy to it, because all you end up with is bad feeling. And I've challenged that person and they've put me down, and now we can't be friends because we fundamentally differ on this concept or the other. And this is partly why I don't especially feel the need that I need to analyze the heck out of the book of Revelation, because if I put my thoughts forward, this vision means that, there's going to be 20 different people who says it's something different. So I think it's noteworthy. It's very noteworthy. And it's interesting to see where people differ and where people agree. But for me, I've never, whereas I understand that, the Old Testament especially is full of books of prophecy, but the difference there is that history can see that they were often fulfilled. With the book of Revelation, it's kind of a pending thing. They set the stage and it's like, where are the actors? It says all these weird things, these weird scenes, these special effects are going to happen, and people are waiting on it. And whereas I can see that's really intriguing, especially with like the rapture and everything being taken up into the sky, and it's like, and there's been dramatizations of that on TV, people just vanishing, like some kind of rapture. And it is really, really intriguing. And I think when you first become spiritual, you're desperate for an incredible spiritual experience right away. It's like when I tried to learn the electric guitar, and within a week, I just thought, I'm going to be just like David Gilmour. I'm going to be like Jimi Hendrix. I'm going to be Eric Clapton, only to find out that all I was doing was really boring chords, and I was rubbish, and I just got disheartened. I wanted it straight away, but I can just about play Wild Thing, because that's like 3 chords over and over again. So regarding the book of Revelation, if I do jump into it, I'm not seeing it as the conclusion and like the final mystery that needs to be solved, because I think everything needs to be revealed in the fullness of time, and that's half of the enjoyment. Yes, it does seem like it's chaotic, but it's a refinement process. The entire Bible, the story of the Bible, is a refinement process over a very, 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 very long period of time. So why should we race to the finish line now? It's like, surely our conduct, if this is the end times, and I don't even like the term end. It sounds like I think it's more healthy to look at it like the way Becky says, different cycles come around. This could have all happened before, over and over and over again. By the time John of Patmos wrote the prophetic vision, he could have been picking up on something in, if you believe in the Akashic record, he could have been picking up on something which is already set there in time from millions and millions of years ago, that all these elements keep coming into play over and over and over again. And he was picking up on an echo of it and writing it down in a language that he thought other people would understand, or the way he was seeing it, he likened it to this, that, and the other. So who knows? I was talking to somebody a while back, and he's a complete atheist, but he loves all the Marvel stuff. He loves Harry Potter. And I said, well, why do you love all that stuff? He said, it's really cool. And I suggested to him, you love it because Marvel, superheroes, and Harry Potter, it's all about magic. Marvel's, it's almost like humans, enhanced humans. It's like Greek mythology, these incredible unique characters who have all their different strengths and weaknesses and properties and unique stories. And he said, I never thought of it like that. And he's a complete atheist, and he's more into Marvel than anyone I can know. He can tell you the interplay between every character, every scene, every battle. And I'm like, but you're so invested in a fictional mythology. But don't you think that storytelling was born out of people's fascination with ancient powers, civilizations that thought of other worlds and aliens and gods and goddesses and angels and Nephilim and, who knows what? It's not just like a fun ride. And that's why I think it was just astonishing to me that it hadn't occurred to him. Why does he love this stuff so much? And I said, because it speaks to your soul. Your human origin is to reach out and think, what more is there? What else could we become as humans? So I hope I did a little bit of a good job there. I didn't actually ruin his enjoyment of Marvel. But I guess people get what they need, where they are. So they will get insights along the way. I don't think atheists really exist. I just don't think it's possible, because the few atheists I have met are so kind of staunch that they're trying. The bizarre thing is they're trying to override you with their system of belief, which is almost a dogmatic religion in itself. So it's an oxymoron that an atheist can be so dogmatic, because they're being more religious than a lot of religious people. So I think most atheists have just become astonished and disheartened with it. And I don't know why I would never want to live in a world. If I came to the conclusion, do you know what? There's no God. There's nothing magical in the universe. All there is here and now. All we are just biological animals just chugging along. And one day we'll just, disintegrate, and there's no residue. It's like, why would I find comfort in that? Why would I find comfort in being an atheist? Because it's like, I'd rather live confused and bewildered and tormented by the nature of reality and the universe at large than just to think there's nothing. Because if I genuinely thought there was nothing, then you're nothing more than just a robot made of meat, and that sounds rubbish. So I don't want to identify as a robot made of meat, and there's no divine spark. That sounds awful. It sounds absolutely awful. But the final thing I'll say, the reason why I'm chilled out about the Book of Revelation, whereas it is fascinating when things crop up on the news and you're like, it must be that this time. Surely it must be that this time. But then you'll look like in the 1500s, it's some battle in Spain. People would then say, well, this must be that scene from the Book of Revelation. So that's why I think it's certain things keep coming around again and again and again, and you can recognize patterns. And that's why I think it is a useful book if you want to analyze it that deeply. But I've always been slightly apprehensive about prophecy generally, and it's controversial for me to say this, but I think astrology is overused these days. I think it's a fine art. I think it is a valid art, but I don't think it's necessarily for the masses to the degree that it's come into sort of modern usage, because people are so focused on astrology and how it can help them, their love life, their finances, their health. And so whereas I respect anybody who's accomplished in astrology, I do think it's a valid form of magic. It is. I don't necessarily think the public hunger for use of astrology is useful. And it's the same, I feel, with prophecy. It can be useful, but when you get obsessed with it, it's ultimately disempowering, because it takes you out of the here and now and the natural revealing of things along the way that we're meant to experience in linear time. If you were born at 6 years old and given a book on exactly how your life's going to go, the exact challenges, what's going to happen in the world, I don't know if a kid would ever, and it would affect their upbringing, because they'd constantly be waiting on, well, when's that going to happen? I know this is going to happen for sure. And that's why prophecy to me is something to be used carefully. In the Divine Comedy by Dante, in the Inferno scene, in the part named Inferno, which is his like descent and exploration of hell, there's actually a scene, because in Inferno, it shows examples of different characters who are receiving some kind of punishment that's proportionate to their wrongdoing. So obviously that's the first part of the Divine Comedy. The final part is actually heaven, so it turns out well. But there's one scene in the Inferno where Dante and Virgil come across a group of prophets, and their punishment for constantly trying to look forwards and making sense of it is that their heads are on backwards. So they're like looking backwards for eternity. And whereas that might sound like religious damnation, I think he was trying to make an example of when you over focus on something, you can end up with the opposite. So that's why I've never really been into prophecy, and I can see the inherent pitfalls that can come from somebody constantly trying to figure out their birth charts and marry it up with the charts of their partner and stuff like that. I do think it's a valid science, but I don't think it's for everyone. And that might be really controversial. I don't want to disrespect any astrologers. I think it's a fascinating area, but that's just where I am at the moment. I'm not saying like everyone should think the way I do, but that's why something like the Book of Revelation, I think it's incredibly noteworthy. But if you do want to dip into it, just relax, chill out about it, and just think about it in the context it was intended. And nothing's absolute. A lot of things in spirituality can't be verified anyway. There's no real need to get terrified by what people say is out there, is on the other side, is coming from outer space. A lot of it can't be verified. It's speculation. And that's lovely. We're meant to bounce around ideas and compare notes. So anybody who wants to look at the Book of Revelation, chill out. Just chill out. I mean, the word apocalypse anyway means revealing, revelation, unveiling. Apocalypse has become synonymous with like some grand battle, some incredible, chaotic, just furor. But the word apocalypse, it's just unveiling. It's all good. So there you go.
Thank you, Daniel. It reminds me of the word Ragnarok as well, which is a Norse word or Nordic. That's the same thing, Ragnarok. People think, oh, it's apocalypse, it's the end of times, but Ragnarok actually means end of the old world, beginning of the new, which is just symbolic of the fact that things never truly end. They change, they transmute, they begin again, and it's everything happens in cycles. there were so many things that you said, and I was trying to make notes and just pick up on different points, but I think in a way you actually covered some of the other questions that I was going to ask as we went along. I'm mindful of the fact we've been chatting now for about an hour and a quarter at least, so I'd love to wrap up, and I just think I'd really like to sort of revisit Magenta. How would you like to sort of wrap up this podcast? I feel we've talked about two different things, but they're also very similar. They're two different aspects of spirituality and how we are connected with the divine, with sacred wisdom, and how we can explore this connection of ourselves in context with the world, the universe, all that is, and time, the past, present, future. And it's something that we are inherently fascinated in. So, Magenta, a few words, please. A few final words from this.
Yes, few words. Yes, I could say so much about everything that Daniel said, but we'd be talking for another hour if I did that. So I just comment on two things. The nine have told me that we are in end times, that we are in that time of revelations. But it's what you said, Becky, about repeating cycles, and that time is actually a spiral. So you're moving upwards into a spiral and going closer and closer and closer to the core of that spiral. And that's not the end. Once you get to the core of that spiral, you move through that core, if you want to use that as a metaphor. So that's time. And as you go round each spiral, these cycles repeat. And about Revelations, which I have not read, unlike Daniel, I have not read Revelations. I've seen the odd quote, but I have not read it as a piece. But the nine have said to me that Revelations is a historical account of your past, and it is a prophesied account of your future. It is both of those, and massively open to interpretation, because it signifies the journey of reality on an individual level. So everyone will get what they need to get from it, and it's not the only text that's presented like that. What else? I made a few notes. Daniel spoke a lot about prophecy, and what the nine say to me is prophecy is a two-sided event, if you will, with prophecy on one side and creation or manifestation on the other. So what is a prophecy is also a manifestation or a creation of that, if you are in alignment with it. If something is prophesied without having the correct frequencies or alignments within from the prophet, then it holds no weight either as a prophecy or as a manifestation. This is where we're so powerful when we come together as a huge collective group, as we make prophecies together. We do this through our thoughts and our feelings. So if we are feeling, knowing, believing, and thinking that we are moving into an upgrade, a new expansion, the end of the old way and the move into a new way, the collapse of all that is corrupt, dark, and does not serve us, and the growth of all that does, if we all hold that thought, however that may appear to us individually and subjectively, that is our prophecy. And that can be reflected in Revelations across the Bible and in many texts. So I will wrap up saying that, I feel. So
thank you. Chris?
I'd just like to say thank you to both Daniel and Magenta. Gosh, we've talked about so many amazing different topics, but yet similar topics, and it's been a wonderful discussion. And Magenta, thank you for the reminder of the importance of our thoughts and why we're directing our attention toward and what we're creating, because I think right now with the current environment and landscape, it's very easy to kind of get sucked down different rabbit holes and have all of your attention placed there. And it's good to step back and really think about how you're balancing that, and if we're spending more time on creating the new and what we want and how we want to move forward. So that was amazing. Thank you. That's a great note to end on, I think. And thank you both for joining us again. This has been a wonderful discussion. And thank you, everyone who's watching our podcast.